Whenever you're playing a video game, what are things that you look for when playing it? Is it the graphics, the music, the levels, the story, or perhaps is it just the overall fun you're having while playing a game? Personally, besides good gameplay and good story, what I look for in a game is, am I having fun? And with most games I played throughout my life, I've always had that feeling. While yes, there are games where I've not felt that at all whatsoever, but when it comes down to it, most of the time when playing a video game, I usually find myself having fun with a good amount of games.
Oh no, you must be mistaken. This came out 14 years ago.
As time went on and technology has advanced, we've gone from little 8-bit pixels in the 1980s to now the most realistic looking eye candy out there. And while that's awesome that we still got some nice shiny graphics on our games to the point where we're questioning how the heck does Kratos look more real than I do, but as nice as having good graphics are in games, we need to also have fun gameplay in them as well, because that's what makes the game engaging and also fun, so years from later after that, you want to go back and play it, and not just making it like a movie type experience. So, how is that lovely gameplay in video games nowadays?
It's been 30 minutes and I've done nothing but hold forward!
Say hello to the good old-fashioned trend in video games nowadays, everybody. Holding forward. Want to play a game where a character has a varied moveset and good gameplay and fun levels to go through? Well, who needs all that when you can just hold forward and listen to words? Forget fun gameplay mechanics, we're holding up to climb, baby! Oh, what is this? This is so stupid! And now I know what you're asking. Who is the company that is responsible for this atrocity of gaming? And that is the one and only, the company that's now known for not knowing what to do with itself anymore, and that is Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog got their start in the late 80s with games like Math Jam and Ski Craze on the Apple II computer, but they wouldn't be really big up until 1996 when they launched the very first Crash Bandicoot game exclusively on the PlayStation on September the 8th. And this is what Naughty Dog would be doing for quite some time back in the 90s. They'd work on the Crash Bandicoot games for Sony, but unfortunately the successful run of the Crash games from Naughty Dog would end up coming to an end after Crash Team Racing. While Naughty Dog did make the games, they didn't own the Crash franchise. Universal did, and after Crash Team Racing released, Naughty Dog became a first-party developer for Sony. Thus, Universal had no dev team to make the Crash games, and they end up giving Crash to Traveler's Tales for Crash Wrath of Cortex to be the sequel to the other Crash games, and then eventually Crash Bandicoot would be handed over to Activision's Toys for Bob, which would be the ones to bring back Crash into the new realm of gaming and made a fantastic game of Crash 4, even though it didn't do as well as intended because people don't like platformers no more. But back to Naughty Dog, they managed to stay relevant with their new game series under Sony being the game series called Jak, which is basically just a 3D action game of the sorts, kind of like most of the action games in the PS2 era of games. But Naughty Dog Studio would eventually reach their peak when they then made a new franchise that went on to be one of the most beloved Sony franchises ever. And I'm not talking about Jak, I'm talking about Naughty Dog's next big thing to meet gaming. Alongside other memorable and great franchises from Sony like God of War, Final Fantasy, Little Big Planet, or even back then with Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider, a new fantastic franchise came into play in the year 2007, and that was Uncharted.
Now here comes the fun part. As someone who has never played Uncharted, I have to now talk about it. So let me just hit up my friend and see if he can give me some info about.
Launching November 19th, 2007, exclusively for the PlayStation 3, Naughty Dog would launch their brand new game franchise being Uncharted. This franchise truly put Naughty Dog on the map for game development studios. Uncharted was a new type of action-adventure game of adventure exploration with stunning graphics for the time, and would be the birth of what would become one of Sony's most iconic characters, Nathan Drake. Alongside other characters like Ratchet and Clank or Kratos, Nathan Drake eventually would become a classic video game character in the Sony PlayStation market. When Uncharted launched in 2007, it was a commercial success from the start. It would even clock in at selling over 2.6 million copies by 2009, and that was pretty darn impressive for this being the start to a new series. And eventually many other titles were released afterwards. This game series was loved by a lot of gamers and critics. However, while Uncharted did revolutionize gaming with its epic storytelling, graphics, and lovable main protagonist, there are things that Uncharted has done to gaming that started making other game devs want a piece of that Uncharted success pie. One of the key examples is that around 2012, games started focusing on really big cinematic shots just like the Uncharted games, specifically in game moments to where you're climbing. In Uncharted, there's a lot of moments where you're holding forward a lot and watching stuff just happen on the screen. It's not too bad because there's still some good gameplay stuff here wise from these games. It's kind of like Tomb Raider a little bit. While Uncharted did start this unfortunate trend, you'd think that this trend would eventually die out, and it probably would have if Naughty Dog kept only making Uncharted games. But we live in the timeline where Naughty Dog in fact did not only make Uncharted games. In the year 2013, Naughty Dog would come out with the game that would put Naughty Dog down in video game company history. Launching June 14th, 2013, exclusively for the PlayStation 3, Naughty Dog would release what would be their most successful game to date, the game that would change everything in gaming, and that was The Last of Us. When it launched in 2013, it was an absolute smashing success, and it shows because the game sold 6 million copies nearly within a year of its release. This game was the thing back then. It made just about everyone want to buy a PlayStation 3 at the time, and keep in mind, this was 2013. The PS3, it was on its way out by this point. The PS4 was just around the corner for that holiday season later that year. But the fact that this single game about two characters, a once father and a child, all alone surviving in a post-apocalyptic world, made everyone want those PS3s back then. And for a good reason. The Last of Us is truly a fantastic experience with an amazing story that is amazingly well written and fantastically done characters that makes you feel for them. That's also backed up by the amazing voice acting from the voice actors. Everyone did a great job here. When playing this and seeing the characters interact and them going through this apocalypse, it makes you actually feel like what's going on is almost real with how good the performance is from the voice actors and the dialogue that is being said. It's like watching actors on a movie or a TV show. And hey, wouldn't you know, The Last of Us would eventually get a TV show in 2023 on HBO Max. Bottom line is that The Last of Us is an amazing story experience with amazing characters, stunning visuals, and a really well done story. But it feels like we're forgetting something, aren't we? I mean, after all, this is a video game, so how is the gameplay of this, well, said video game?
I mean, I can hit people with a piece of wood, so I mean.
So as previously stated, I think The Last of Us is a fantastic experience with an amazing story and really well done characters that truly make it a fantastic time, but not as a video game. When Naughty Dog released The Last of Us, they really want to deliver on an amazing story with this game and make you feel like you're in a cinematic experience, just like a movie almost. The gameplay, however, the gameplay of The Last of Us is like Naughty Dog's previous games from the Uncharted series. The gameplay style is basically an evolved Uncharted, except more linear in The Last of Us. And what I mean by linear is that there's not much exploration involved, unlike Uncharted. Sure, there's some puzzle-like situations, but other than that, here in The Last of Us, it's just walking. Now, in some instances, like the opening, it's fine since it's us just starting out, but after that, you slowly start to realize, oh shoot, this is all I'm doing, isn't it? Now, I will say granted, when it's time to fight infected or clickers, or when there's stealth missions, these are good moments of the game, and actually get me intrigued whenever I'm playing. But once you get done fighting off infected, we're back to holding forward and listening to stuff happen again. Look at this moment right here after you meet Ellie. This goes on and on with you just holding forward, listening to dialogue. Also, gotta love when there's moments when you can't sprint at all during this. Great touch there, game designers. Love it. The point I'm trying to get here is that The Last of Us is not a video game. It is a movie that you can interact with. This isn't really my particular game style right here. I like it when I have to be engaged in a game where I have to think about what I'm doing in games and not just watching stuff happen that I can interact with. A game where gameplay is at the front seat, where that's the first thing developers think about, and then the story comes later. In The Last of Us, the story is at the very front seat and gameplay is in the back seat. But at the same time, it really kind of just works for this kind of game. While I don't prefer this style of gameplay, it really does work for The Last of Us. And it also seemed to work for Naughty Dog, because The Last of Us is now one of the most iconic video games of the 2010s. Whenever you talk about a game from the PS3 era, what is one of the first few that come to mind? There you go. I already know what you're thinking. But regardless, The Last of Us was very successful when it released in 2013 on the PS3, and even getting a remaster for the PS4 a year later, and thus allowing more people to have access to this game. But while The Last of Us was very successful and is now loved by many, what was the aftermath of gaming after The Last of Us? Because there was no way that this game came out with all the positive reception it had and all the love for it that it would not have left an impact. So, what was the impact? Well, you know how it usually goes if there is something that's successful for one person. Someone else will try their best to crawl out of the shadows and try to replicate that success. And most of the time, it doesn't end well. After The Last of Us became very successful, slowly as months and years went on afterwards, more and more games started to come out with The Last of Us game style, where you play as a character with the gameplay, combat, and everything else is just like The Last of Us. And thus, it gave birth to the atrocious style of games that has started to play gaming for the past 10 years now, being the over-the-shoulder camera. This style of gaming has just about taken over in games. It's nearly everywhere now. Now, you could make the argument saying it's always been there in some games, but not necessarily. Let me explain. Take games like Red Dead Redemption, for example. In that game, the camera is behind John Marston, but not in a way like The Last of Us. You see, in Red Dead Redemption, when you turn around, John will face the screen, and when you hold back on the controller, he'll walk toward you. Now, in The Last of Us, if you hold the controller stick back at you, Joel will just walk backwards. So keep in mind, some games use a style that's like over-the-shoulder style, but it's just like that when walking around as the character. Examples of games that do this are Ghost of Tsushima, The Witcher 3, GTA, Tomb Raider, and of course, the Red Dead games. Those games have a camera style that just happens to be over the shoulder when focusing on the character, and that's the kind of over the shoulder that's good. What I'm not okay with is this kind of over the shoulder, the kind where you just hold forward 24/7. This isn't good game design. It's not fun. This doesn't make a good game. Sure, there's something going on every now and again, but most of the time, you're just holding forward and listening to stuff happen. Companies saw the success of The Last of Us and thought, so all we have to do is just hire some really good writers, make dramatic shots that have nothing to do with gameplay whatsoever, and bam, game. As years went on, Sony kept putting out games from companies with this sort of style, to the point where a good chunk of first-party PlayStation games from Sony all looked the same, where you're holding forward. It got to the point where this was so popular in the AAA scene of gaming that even the budget titles were doing it too! I kid you not, whenever a new game comes out, or when I want to go back and play a game I missed out on, I have to be concerned if it's an over-the-shoulder camera type game, and that's not a fear I should have when I want a game. And one of the biggest key examples of how atrocious this gameplay is that there is a franchise that was never intended for this at all, but now it's forever stuck with it. On April 20th, 2018, exclusively for the... Okay, yeah, you get it by this point. Sony and Santa Monica Studios released the new entry and the brand new reboot game for the franchise of PlayStation, being God of War. This game was the game that brought back the God of War franchise after years of being rotted away since the disappointing prologue game, God of War Ascension, in 2013. When God of War Ascension released back in 2013, this would end up being the last ever Greek God of War game. The reason for this game coming out is still a mystery to this very day. This series already was well wrapped up after 3, and there was already the last PSP game being Ghost of Sparta. So the reason for Ascension is really beyond me. But when this game came out, the game was not received well at all. The poor storytelling, gameplay being massively different from the previous games, bugs, audio issues, and also just the fact that this game really felt dull and meh and rushed out the door. We've already had amazing experiences with this franchise, so this one was really tame in comparison. But bottom line is, God of War Ascension was the first God of War game to not be received well, and it really made Santa Monica Studios rethink what they were doing. So in 2014, when Santa Monica started concepting for a brand new God of War title, they were debating on how were they going to do the gameplay. This was something serious for this new title, and even Cory Barlog, even he knew that this was very important, that they must get the gameplay of the game absolutely right. And the reason why is, when it came to the God of War games, something that players love from the series is not only the story and the character Kratos, but the incredible gameplay from this series. This series' gameplay and combat of the original trilogy is what made God of War so loved back then. So when making this new one, they had two decisions. They either had to stick with the original gameplay or do something brand new. So in making this new one, they really had to tackle the gameplay and how were they going to do it. They were scared that people were not going to like it because of the feedback of Ascension. So what did they do with this brand new God of War game that was going to bring back the franchise in a new way? Did they bring back the old gameplay and make it refined for new generation consoles? Why can't I ever have anything nice? So with this brand new rebooted God of War game, they did away with the well-known and loved original God of War gameplay style with amazing combat and puzzles. Now Kratos is now on half the screen with that lovely Last of Us over-the-shoulder camera style. Wait a minute. Oh, come on! So with this new God of War game, not only did it come with a new and very interesting take on Kratos' character of him years later calmed down, now has a new family, but now we're set in Norway with new gameplay. And...
you know what I'm going to say.
Now I want to get this out of the way. God of War 2018 isn't a bad game. This game's story is great. It's the gameplay I'm not a fan of. While yes, in Ragnarok, they definitely improved upon it by a lot and made it more enjoyable, this still isn't it for me, man. I've talked about the new God of War games versus the old ones before in the past, and if I were you, I'd go check that out just so you can get a better understanding on why I feel this way. But to sum it up, I do not like the new direction gameplay-wise for this series. It doesn't suit a series called God of War. They tried to make it work, and they somewhat deal with the combat and whatnot, but that's not when you don't have to watch for these annoying arrows behind you. They took what already worked for the series and changed it massively. It's like when you take an artist away from a band. That band suddenly loses what it originally had. So thus, it's kind of like what they did here for God of War. They took away what made it so lovable, and now it's completely different. They think they could slap the name God of War and Kratos on a Last of Us sort of style game, and everyone will love it. Now, you could make the argument saying the fixed camera angles have not aged well, and people were tired of quick time events in this gameplay style as a whole. Okay, first of all, how has it not aged well? I can see everything around me, and there is not one enemy that's not in my sight. I can see everything that's going on, and even when it's not combat, I can see everything just fine. What do you mean it's not aged well? Also, when exactly were people tired of the QuickTime events? From what I can gather, nobody was really tired of them. Is it because Ascension burned you out of them because, oh, I don't know, they made them pretty mediocre? And I don't know about you, but when God of War 3 hit the scene in 2010, it seems like no one could get enough of them back then. So, I don't get the gameplay change. And you're talking to somebody who got into the God of War franchise long after the original series wrapped up. And you could say there's the other argument, when you do something so many times, people will eventually get tired of it. Well, you kinda are right. But here's where you're kinda wrong too. You're right to where if you keep doing the exact same thing over and over again, people will eventually get tired of it. But if you keep it interesting every time, people will be engaged. Take 2D Mario games for example. We all love them, but they're all kinda almost the same. They all still have the basic gameplay formula of go left and right and platform as Mario and get past enemies and get power-ups. But when the new series came around in the 2000s, Nintendo started milking the crap out of them and people started to get tired of them by New Super Mario Bros. 2 for the 3DS. So, when Nintendo heard this by the time New Super Mario Bros. U came out, we now have Mario Wonder, a breath of fresh air for 2D Mario. And it still manages to be the same Mario gameplay, but it's brought back in a brand new way. See what I'm getting at here? I get the argument saying that the original God of War gameplay style could get boring over time, but tell me this, which would you rather have here? An original style of game with fun, amazing gameplay and combat with a fantastic story thrown in there as well, with amazing writing, or just a game that looks like another popular game, but with a massively overdone story with a ton of Oscar bait, but still tries to be a continuation of a game that was already well established and had a decent ending? I'll wait on your answer. So I'll answer your next question. Why does Santa Monica not focus on all the gameplay and whatnot? I'll tell you why. Because in a game where you'd have to spend a lot of time making awesome stuff like this, there wouldn't be enough room for this. The new God of War games ever since 2018 have started taking a page from Naughty Dog's book and decided for the new games in the God of War series is that instead of gameplay being in the front seat throughout development like the previous games, now the story has been moved up to the front seat and gameplay and combat has taken a back seat. And what do you get when you do this? You get yet another first-party PlayStation game with a boring over-the-shoulder camera style that's not much fun to offer besides graphics and story, and that's it. This franchise now has the fan base split. There's one side of people who are so awed by this game's Oscar bait that the only words they could form out the mouth is the words 10 and out of. Then there's the other side that can see right through the Oscar bait and point out the mediocre gameplay, or lack thereof, and point out the fact that this franchise is indeed not in its best spot than what it used to be. Again, I don't hate modern God of War, but from a gameplay perspective, it's not good for a series called God of War that already established amazing gameplay. Whenever you look at the old ones, you think this game is called God of War. Now it's just a reskin of The Last of Us with Kratos. Honestly, if this wasn't called God of War, you'd think this was some other game. These over-the-shoulder camera games keep crawling out the woodwork. Whatever happened to making amazing games with fantastic gameplay and making a great story with it? Something that will be remembered for many years to come. Nowadays, it's either Oscar bait driven game or a remake/remaster of an existing game that has good gameplay. What happened? It's almost like companies saw that you actually don't have to try and make a fun game anymore. They just saw the success of The Last of Us and started making all kinds of games be just wannabe movies with tons of Oscar bait and pretty shiny graphics and over-the-top acting to get people all teary-eyed, and suddenly, game is perfect, then their game is instantly getting all kinds of easy accolades and awards that has no game aspect whatsoever and no love and effort and won't be remembered, just easy over-the-top Oscar bait. There. That right there is the problem we have now. Oscar bait. This right here is a problem in a lot of modern gaming when it comes to this. And you know what's to blame for all this Oscar bait, over-the-top acting, and all of this lazy gameplay styles that's coming out in recent games? This right here. This is what you have to point to. Look, I get that it's not entirely The Last of Us' fault. It's mostly company's fault. But ever since The Last of Us launched in 2013, its impact on gaming has not been a good one. Sure, there are still some good games that come out since then that's not like it at all, but ask yourself this. How many games that have come out since The Last of Us have either not looked like this, played like this, or overly done story to the point where it feels like gameplay was an afterthought, but the story came first? I know some people can just say, oh, gaming has evolved to be more cinematic and emotional with a well-driven story. Well, let me ask you this. Why does it have to be like this? Why? And what reason does that make sense? I'll go ahead and give the answer. The answer is no. Gaming has not evolved. If anything, it's devolved. I don't know if you know about this, but gaming has always had good stories with amazing gameplay. I know, crazy to think about, right? There just wasn't no pretty shiny graphics or over-the-top acting done back then. Lines were delivered perfectly without needing over-the-top emotional moments. Gaming has always had amazing stories with it. So now I'll ask you this. Why should a game have to be like a movie to be good now? I'll tell you. companies are frankly just getting lazy. With how we progress with technology, games are becoming more and more powerful and better looking as time goes on. But at the same time, companies are starting to get lazy, and they're just thinking that all they have to do is make the game look pretty and give over-the-top acting, and there you go, instant success. Name a game that has come out recently that has left an impact on you like before. I'll wait. The reason why is because games nowadays aren't games half the time. They're cinematic experiences that you can play. And yes, there are some games that still come out that are still good at the core with gameplay, but most games you see are normally just the movie type experiences and are not gameplay focused. Games are meant to be a fun and entertaining experience. That's what makes a video game, well, a video game, not being all cinematic and movie-like. If I wanted something cinematic and high-level acting, I'd go watch a movie or a TV show. I don't want movie-like stuff in games. Now, I know this isn't everywhere in gaming, but with most of the time in the AAA scene of gaming, this is almost everywhere. I miss when games were meant to be a fun experience when you play the game, not when you just hold forward and listen to dialogue half the time. You just have the same old copy and pasted style, and everything just feels so unoriginal because it's all like the same. That's what made game franchises so good and unique back then, is that they all stood out from one another. And thankfully, companies like Nintendo and Sega have not fallen into this whatsoever. How would you feel if Mario or Zelda fallen into the over-the-shoulder camera style? You'd freaking hate it, wouldn't you? And I'm so glad that Nintendo doesn't do this. But the big boys over at Sony need to get it together. So in conclusion, did The Last of Us ruin all of gaming? Well, it depends on who you talk to, really. Some will say that The Last of Us made gaming better than it's ever been, ever. Then there's some saying that it didn't change a darn thing. Personally, I don't hate The Last of Us, but I think how it impacted gaming with its style of gameplay and the effect it had on developers to make more story-driven games and less gameplay experience games hasn't had the best impact on the gaming landscape. Who knows though? Maybe one day this style will eventually die out. And maybe one day companies will realize maybe we should start focusing on gameplay first and then focus on the story. But until then, let's just hope that game devs continue to make amazing experiences for us in other fields that's truly worthwhile, and maybe one day we'll convince bigger devs on the higher ups to focus on amazing gameplay first in games rather than spend all their time on just trying to get some Oscar bait. But you know what's going to happen? We're going to get away from this style. Naughty Dog's going to come up with a new game franchise that's going to have even more minimal gameplay and even harder story than before, and thus everyone's going to try to copy that. Wait a minute, why does that actually sound kind of realistic? Wait a minute, Naughty Dog, no!